Welcome back to the Gleeson New Homes podcast. Today marks a special episode as we honour women in construction and International Women's Day. Joining us are two remarkable women from Gleeson, Alice Best, our Head of Organisational Development, and Sarah Rochelle, our Senior Ecologist. They are here to celebrate and advocate for women in the construction industry, sharing their experiences in a predominantly male environment. This year's Women in Construction theme, Keys to the Future, highlights the strength and expertise of women, emphasising their pivotal role in shaping the construction industry's future. Additionally, as International Women's Day coincides with the Women in Construction Week, we will delve into the 2024 campaign theme, Inspire Inclusion. Alice and Sarah will share their success they've achieved and the importance of promoting diversity and inclusion within the industry. By sharing their stories and insights, they aim to inspire and empower more women to pursue careers in construction and break the barriers in traditionally male-dominated fields. So, welcome to the podcast. Please begin by giving us a brief overview of your roles at Gleeson and what that entails.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for that. We got there.
No, thank you for having us. Really excited to be joining you on this podcast. I'm Alice, I'm the Head of Organisational Development. My role involves everything to do with talent, how we attract the right talent for the business, once we have the right talent in place, what we do in terms of developing that talent and engaging people, and really making sure that we've got a great place to work here at Gleeson so people feel like they can really thrive in their roles and as part of the business.
Nice. Amazing. And welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am Gleeson's in-house Senior Ecologist. I review and advise on all of our sites prior to us bidding on them. And obviously throughout the entire process of when we have a site where we're actually going to buy it, going through the planning process, I work with our external ecological consultants and basically guide us through that.
So I can imagine as Senior Ecologist, you're out on site quite a lot. What does it mean to you to be a female in an environment where there's predominantly a lot of males around you and working closely with?
Well, I think if anything, sometimes it feels like a bit of a responsibility because I'm the only woman on site at all most of the time. But also in relation to being an ecologist, because I'm often the only ecologist. So I'm the only one for both things.
Yeah.
So it's definitely unusual to come in and have to sort of be the only person that is both female and an ecologist. But usually it's a relatively positive experience because the whole reason that I'm coming in is to advise and guide through the process and explain what we need to do or not do, depending on what's going on. So usually it's a positive experience, but it's very variable because you can go different sites. You have different cultures within sites, within different organisations, because obviously previously I was not in-house. I worked for a consultancy. So it would be a different client every few weeks. So it varies a lot.
Yeah. You've said that you've been in the industry for 9 years.
Yeah.
How have you seen it change from when you started to now?
I do think there are more women now.
Yeah.
There is still not a lot. I know that it's still a relatively small percentage. But I think people are less surprised now to see a woman turn up than they used to be 9 or 10 years ago. I mean, occasionally I do still get, especially if I go to the shop in my site clothes after work, sometimes I do get people doing a double take, and I'm always a little bit surprised. It's like, have you really never seen a woman in construction before? Is it really so unusual?
Yeah.
But I guess it depends where you are and what projects you work on as well.
So Alice, from working kind of in the talent area where we're trying to attract and inspire women to join the team, not only, predominantly joining obviously Gleeson, but as a whole promoting women in construction, how do you find it? Do you kind of find we have a lot of people interested? What's your experience?
So if we look at the full construction industry in the UK, we've got over 3 million people in the construction industry. And if we look at the stats of that, there are only 12 to 15%. And I say that as a range because we report different statistics. The majority now we're reporting closer to 15% of females in the industry.
Right.
but it's still such a small percentage.
Yeah.
When we think of how many females are in this country.
Yeah.
Construction industry is a huge contributor to the economy, and we're seeing just a lack of representation from the female workforce in the country. And, you know, we have a lot of conversation around the benefit of diversity from many different angles.
Yeah.
There are so many positive statistics that can be achieved from having an increased level of diversity. So when I look at it from a talent attraction piece, there's absolutely things that the construction industry can do to entice more females into construction. And, you know, we look at maybe educating earlier on in schools, educating people about the construction industry, because it is an absolutely cracking industry to be in.
Yeah.
But I don't think we sell it enough to people who are looking at, where do I want to be in the future? What do I want my career to be? You know, there's absolutely amazing career development pathways when we see the succession rates that people have had and progressed in their roles in construction. It's amazing, and those pathways are there. You can earn good money, great benefits. You know, it is a great environment to work in. So it's definitely kind of attracting people early on to kind of how their skills can really fit into the construction industry.
When I remember when I was back in school, I don't think we ever had any conversations about construction. Like, we had obviously the typical like going into medicine, or like, which are an amazing sectors to go in as well, but there was a lack of construction information, I think, at school. I know at Gleeson we do have kids come into the developments, and we kind of have a whole health and safety on site and that aspect of things, which is amazing. But I think definitely more of it would benefit the younger generation, to inspire them to come into the industry.
Yeah, and I agree with you to an extent that it, you know, historically we would look at you know, the education routes, and there'd be so much more encouragement around going down that academic route, going to, you know, get your A-levels, going to university, which are all still brilliant routes and completely relevant in construction industry. But we're seeing more of a transition around apprenticeships now, going through that apprenticeship route. Again, apprenticeships have existed for a very long time, but predominantly started off kind of in the trade area. Still exist in the trade area, and we're seeing that evolve as well. So trade apprenticeships were setting up, you know, Gleeson was part of the NHBC bricklaying hub over in Hull. So we took our first Gleeson cohort to that bricklaying hub. So, you know, trade apprenticeships are evolving, but we're also seeing the types of apprenticeships to evolve as well. So such as we're seeing, we have technical trainees, we have commercial trainees, and we are starting to see more females enter in through those routes. So it's such a positive route to be encouraging at those early stages in education. The apprenticeship routes are great. For construction, absolutely, but from all aspects. So, you know, trades, absolutely, commercial, engineering, technical, so many other routes.
There's loads of, I think that's one thing about construction as well, is there isn't just one route in. There's just so many avenues of construction that you can go down. But speaking about inspiring others, what inspired both of you to get into the sector?
Well, mine, obviously, I am an ecologist. And I came via consultancy to, you know, working in-house Gleeson. I think mine was just always that I had an interest in nature and the environment, and it, even from a really young age, it always interested me. I was never quite sure what I wanted to do with it exactly. Even through university, I knew I wanted to be in that area, but I didn't have a set goal. And I sort of started volunteering to see if I enjoyed ecology and the surveys and that aspect of it, and I found that I did, and it just kind of grew from there. And obviously a lot of ecology centres around advice for development in the construction industry. And I started off mainly on linear schemes, roads, bridges, eventually rail, and then sort of also expanded into doing pretty much everything in between as well, housing, industrial. And then eventually I moved actually to Gleeson to do it in-house.
So what inspired me to kind of get into the industry? So I started off my career in manufacturing. Not too dissimilar to kind of culture-wise to construction. But my move into construction actually happened by a key role model in my kind of career. which was from a female in construction who really role modelled to me the brilliant opportunities within the industry. And if I look at kind of my experience having shifted into construction, so I'm very grateful to that person back then who kind of encouraged me to join the construction industry. And I was excited about joining. It's not too dissimilar to manufacturing. But when I look at kind of my career over whilst being in construction, I've been here at Gleeson for just over 7 years. I started off as a HR advisor, and I have kind of been exposed to areas of the business. I've been on my development journey, getting professional qualifications, and been able to go on to like key projects and initiatives, and all part of that has led to me progressing through my career. So now in the role of Head of Organisational Development. And if you look at the lifespan of that 7 years, it's actually quite a short period of time to go through that development journey, but really having that quality experience in the construction industry has just been fantastic for my growth and development. And this is why earlier I was talking about that it is such a great industry, because there are these career path development routes. They do exist, and there's great opportunities.
Yeah. So what changes then have you seen from starting off 7 years ago to now for women in construction?
I mean, if we look at it from a statistical perspective, the female representation in the industry has grown significantly over the last few years. So we've definitely seen a shift of more females in the industry. We're starting to see more role models. And role models are so important for us to really share what the lived experience is for females in the construction industry. So I'd say over the 7 years that has definitely increased.
So we've kind of touched on inclusive and how we're trying to attract the right talent and bring in the right talent. How, as an industry, do we continue to keep it inclusive and sustain the talent?
Well, I think you've got to, you've actually sort of got to practice what you're preaching a little bit, because I've worked at organisations that are very proud of how inclusive they are and diverse, but actually they don't actually think about what it's like for the people on the ground in those organisations. Like they haven't got proper toilet facilities for women. They're just very limited. The sites aren't set up in that way. And it's obviously never even occurred to anybody that it would possibly ever be an issue, because they just haven't had to before. So it sort of feels like, like I said, it's subtle now. It's not, blatant, but there are things like you just don't feel thought about. They're not bothered about you being on site. And then I've been to other organisations where I've gone in and they've got an actual female toilet, and they've got like women's health information, and it's clean and not being used to store mop buckets and stuff.
But how sad is it that that's a comment that that shouldn't even have to be it should just be the norm. It shouldn't be kind of like a thing that we're amazed about, which I think that kind of all just stems onto the fact of how it is a male dominant industry.
And I don't think it's a necessarily a negative thing that they don't do this stuff, because it's understandable that if it doesn't affect you, you may not realise about it. But it's about having people all the way up so that you can have that representation and understanding throughout at every level, rather than just talking about it and saying that you do it, but actually in practice, because you haven't got the right people all the way through. People don't think to do it.
And that's a really interesting point as well, in terms of the when we were talking about the role models piece, and to really enable and unlock an environment that feels totally inclusive, we need to understand the lived experiences of all people who are part of that workplace. So I think we often don't always see barriers as barriers themselves, because we wouldn't find it as a barrier ourselves. But in order to understand what those potentially seen or unseen barriers could be, we need to speak to people. We need to understand more about each other's lived experiences, and where the differences lie in those lived experiences. We all have a different experience. The more we can understand that from others around us, then we can start putting things in place to remove barriers. We often talk about the opportunity for reverse mentoring when it comes to understanding different people's lived experiences.
Do you have any kind of unseen barriers that you've come across or anything that we could, I mean, this could be a start of talking about them. It can be what kind of experiences have you had?
I think there's a lot of, and again, it is understandable because we've all got biases, but like subconscious bias about the way that I'm interacted with versus the way that male staff are interacted with.
Yeah.
And often it's out of a place of kindness as well, but it just sort of, really makes it clear that I'm thought of differently.
Yeah.
And I would like it to just be normal to have women on site, not to be worried about or told to be careful or I just like it to be the same, just normal.
Equal.
The likes of feedback and conversations I've had around barriers is sometimes in a meeting, if there is one female in a room full of males, maybe their voice isn't always heard, but equally they're not sure if that's to do with gender. This is what I mean.
It can be hard to tell.
Yeah, it's not always that it's necessarily to do with gender, but if we could all take kind of thought in this and think about, if you're in a room in a meeting, you see somebody whose voice isn't being heard, how do we include everybody's voice in that discussion, in that decision making, in that problem solving area? How do we hear everybody's voice? And this is the piece around inclusion. We talk about diversity is having representation of all different groups and all different backgrounds, but inclusion is the yes, we've got everybody there, but is everybody being heard and everybody's voice being heard? That's inclusion for me.
Yeah, and I think it's having those conversations and having the openness and not the feeling of you can't talk about it because it's an awkward conversation or it's just being open and talking about it. So I know a lot in this episode we've spoke about women in construction. Obviously, with it being Women in Construction Week, absolutely amazing. But also today marks International Women's Day, and I think it's really important for us to have an open conversation. We've had a few off camera, but I think also just touching on women's health, kind of breaking the stigma and the biasness of, if that's a word, of women. Kind of, it's more just of an opening the floor to a discussion, really. Is there anything that you guys feel strongly about, or anything that you would want to openly talk about on this episode?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree it's important that we talk about, particularly on this day, women and what it is like in our lived experience. But I think that's the same for any different kind of backgrounds that we need to be having this conversation. I think we can often feel a little bit uncomfortable when we start talking around areas of underrepresentation or inclusivity or diversity. I think we often feel uncomfortable talking about these things.
Yeah.
But we talked earlier about needing to understand each other's lived experiences. The only way we're going to have that understanding is by speaking about it.
Yeah.
It's sharing the educational piece. What is it like to be us? But from, like I say, from so many different backgrounds.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. And I think just having that open conversation, one thing that I feel quite strongly about is women's health. I think there's so many important things that aren't spoke about enough, which impact women in the office, in the work days. It can be things that, and it almost makes you feel like you can't talk about it openly because it could make someone feel awkward. Whereas if other women and men were exposed to it more, I mean, personally, I recently just had my smear test, which is an uncomfortable thing to go through, but I think I'm a massive advocate. Anyone who's not had it done in the past 4 years, absolutely go and get it done. And I think I kind of made more of a point of being completely open with my team. Like, I've got my doctor's appointment, I'm going to go get my smear done. I was speaking to my brothers about it. I was really open and encouraging people to do it. And I think there's other things as well, such as menopause. And I think you touched on when we were talking earlier about having the women's facilities. Yeah. You were saying that there's the women's information on the back of the toilet in how to check for breast cancer, that kind of stuff. It's all of that which needs to be having less awkward conversations.
Yes.
Yeah. And, women's sanitary, bins, and talking about periods as well.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, you can go on a site, with men that have worked there 50 years and they're all, quite, what's the word? They talk about anything.
Yeah.
But God forbid you mention your period. They'd all be horrified.
Yeah.
So it's really awkward. And if you haven't got anything set up in the toilet, you haven't got bin, you can't clean yourself because the bloody water's not working.
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's definitely a barrier.
Yeah.
But it's one that's really difficult to raise because it makes people feel awkward.
And then it would make yourself feel awkward because you've got to go out and you've got to have that conversation as well. But if more people were, what's the word? If more people were kind of, I can't think of what the word is. More people were like enlightened about it.
Or
then,
just open, it wouldn't be a big deal. Because it's not a big deal, but it sort of ends up being one.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There was we've spoke about a lot of really interesting things and a lot of, I think, taboo topics which haven't really been discussed too much openly. I think off camera there was something really interesting that you said about temperature with your background.
Oh yeah.
What was what you were saying earlier about the women and male in temperatures?
Yeah, there's been scientific studies done that have basically found that women and men are most productive at different temperatures. So it's almost, they're not the same. So women are more productive in warmer temperatures generally, and men are generally more productive in cooler temperatures. So it's just really interesting that something so small can actually have an impact.
Yeah.
Not to say you can't overcome it, but it is there.
Yeah.
And it is a proven thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think, have either of you ever felt like you've been in a situation where you can't really talk about as something that you've gone through because it is a taboo or because it is an uncomfortable, or you've been surrounded by men and females who maybe don't have the experience or...
You go. No, you
Well,
go.
I was going to say, to be fair, I'm quite fortunate that I grew up in a house of females, so we often talk about these, what could be classed as taboo subjects, and would make other people feel uncomfortable. My dad, for sure, has become very comfortable with talking about these kind of subjects. Actually, I wouldn't say very comfortable, but he's become used to it. He's educated, he's had that knowledge and experience, whether he wanted it or not. So the whole kind of sense of belonging, I do feel like you feel more comfortable talking about things that you experience when you're surrounded by people who may also be experiencing those things. So that's where we lead back into role modelling. That's why it's important, if we're going to be seeing females progress within their careers, just really thriving in what it is that they're passionate about, it's important that they've got role models around them and people that they can speak to. But that leads on to, it's not just about role modelling, it's allyship. So the more that we can share and educate one another in our lived experiences, whether that is your gender background, whether that is your age background, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's any of those backgrounds, it's important that we can have that support and understanding of one another. Allyship is what's going to be able to change the environment that we are in if we all have a better understanding and can actually speak about things that might initially feel uncomfortable, but it's the only way that we're going to be able to address it.
Absolutely. Well, I think to round off the episode, unless you guys have got anything else that you want to particularly touch on or express, if not, I have one last question to ask you both to round off the episode. Who as a female, and it could be in work, this could be personal, could be a celebrity, what female inspires you and why?
So you asked me about this last week, and I've really been kind of reflecting on this, and the reason for it is, actually, it turns out I'm a little bit greedy when it comes to looking at people who have inspired me. I find inspiration in all kind of walks of life, all different backgrounds. I really do. So I was trying to drill down to like who is the core person that inspires me. But actually, I find inspiration from my family members, from my friends, from close friends, from people in the wider society, people in the workplace. I've had, even when I look at it, celebrities, one of my key kind of inspirations is like Shauna Coxey, who's a really strong female climber. And I think any females who are really driven to overcome any barriers, or anything that could be in their way, but are driven to deliver and just perform and just be outstanding in what they're passionate about, is really what drives me and inspires me. And absolutely one of the absolute queens to who does inspire me it's Aretha Franklin.
Of course.
Absolute legend. And from Aretha's perspective, when we talk about respect, she says, find out what it means to me. So when we talk about understanding different people's lived experiences, we need to do what Aretha says and find out what it means to me.
Absolutely. What about you, Sarah?
I think mine's a bit more, again, it's not just one person, or it's definitely people that are similar to me, seeing them do and overcome similar things. So it would probably be things like former colleagues that I've seen doing the job well, particularly when I was junior, you know, having the people above me, other women that were clearly absolutely amazing and doing this job and doing it really well in spite of all these barriers. And it was like, oh, I can do that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably quite a few people.
Yeah. I have one person who inspires me. I mean, it's something that, again, is never really spoke about. I don't think I've even openly said this to her before either, but my sister-in-law, called Laura, her and my brother have gone through quite a few obstacles with getting pregnant, and as a result they've gone through IVF. They've got now 2 gorgeous children, 2 little girls, one who recently we welcomed on the 9th of February. So I have a new niece, both happy, both healthy, and they've gone through so much. And I think Laura especially has, I can't even begin to imagine what she's gone through as a woman, kind of through miscarriages, through IVF, through the whole physical and emotional aspect of it. But for her to go through all of that and still come out at the end and still be kind of like the optimistic, happy, strong person that she is. She's also a doctor, she's a paediatrician. So kind of her professional life, her personal life is such a, there's just so much going on. But to look at her, to talk to her, to have a conversation with her, you wouldn't know kind of everything that she's gone through. And I think her whole journey and the person that she is today really inspires me, because I just think, and like after it now, she's got a gorgeous family and she's like everything is kind of has worked out in the end. But I think her and everyone else who kind of has gone through that experience, again, it's another thing about women's health which isn't particularly openly spoken about too much, and I think it's more common than you think as well.
Absolutely.
I think more people go through it than you actually realise, because it is such a hard conversation as someone who's gone through it to talk about. You wouldn't want to say it. So that would be who inspires me.
I think it's really important to talk about as well. Yeah. So I too have family, friends who have gone through similar experiences. And I think this is another one of those topics that we don't often talk about, that females go through these physical, biological challenges that do have an absolute effect on your mental health. And it's how you continue with the day-to-day with that going on. But I feel like we don't have that conversation enough to actually appreciate what is going on and how this could have an impact on how you show up on a daily basis. No matter how strong you are to overcome that, it inevitably will have an effect on how you are. So I do think it's super important to talk about, because these are physical. When we talked about actually we should recognise and we should talk that there are differences. And we should absolutely accept that that's the same thing. But we need to talk about it, because there will be stuff that has an impact on what we do.
Exactly.
I think it's a great one to talk about.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me on the episode. Okay. I've really, really enjoyed talking. And it's been great, I think, to have the open conversations about women in construction, women in general, equality, everything. Yeah. I feel like it's been a really good episode.
Yeah. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Fab. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you'd like to catch up on any previous episodes, give us a search on YouTube, the Gleeson New Homes podcast, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram @Gleeson Homes to see the behind the scenes snippets.